to those of us who attend here faithfully every year at this time, the conditions, the environmental conditions, you know, we're no stranger to these conditions, and they have never in the past prevented us from doing this memorial. But it's good to see so many of you this morning here. And you know, President Hoyte was a very dynamic man. He, in fact, was iconoclastic and was really the purveyor of a revolution in a way in Guyana, an economic revolution. But I don't want to say more of that. We have somebody who was part and parcel of his program here. I will ask him to, without further ado, to make his presentation in respect of this morning proceedings. And so I invite Vice President Cargonich to address us.
My appearance here at this podium is as much a surprise to you as it is to me. But given the long and very close association I've had with Hugh Desmond Hoyte, I think it is a privilege to have the opportunity to exchange a few thoughts with you as regards the man himself and his work, perhaps the legacy that he's left us. So I take the opportunity, and I hope you'll understand that this is entirely impromptu. I first met Mr. Hugh Desmond Hoyte at a cabinet meeting which had been called to look at economic strategy. And at that time, they were examining some of the challenges of switching from, what might I call that, typical post-colonial economic package to trying to find something more radical and in keeping with the thoughts of the party and the leadership of LFS Burnham at the time. The encounter wasn't really special in any way because, as many of you would know, he was an extremely quiet man. Most of the time, he would be, while the cabinet meeting is going on, he'd be reading something, The Economist or something, and you will see him from time to time pass something, especially to Hubert Jack, for example. And Jack would be tickled, he'll interrupt the meeting, call the leader's attention to something in the article. And you know, the meeting would be moved into some state of levity for some time, and then they'll continue with the business. Some years later, I was part of a committee that was called the Restructuring Committee, which gave me an opportunity to see another side of Hugh Desmond Hoyte. The committee, initially led by Dr. Reid, but consisting of both Willie Dimas, Alistair McIntyre, and a number of political leaders from the PNC, as well as representatives of the PPP. And in that forum, which was committed to looking at challenges of governance and trying to recommend to the cabinet a structure that would be appropriate for the move to socialism, that is nationalization, post-nationalization, how decisions should be made, what would be the economic priorities. Hugh Desmond Hoyte was the de facto chairman of that body, and Clarence Ellis was the person that provided the technical and analytical support for that work. And in that forum, one saw a man with a capacity and a willingness to tackle issues. He was especially concerned with governance, and as most of you know, well, you should know, that the structure that eventually emerged by way of the local government system was essentially Hugh Desmond Hoyte and a couple of others, including Messrs. Hamilton and the former Commission of the Lands, TOL. They worked on that most closely. But the point I want to make is that he took a close interest in governance in general, and in particular in local government, and in trying to ensure that in the towns and cities as well as in the rural areas, our people, whether they be those in the party or outside of the party, had an opportunity to be involved in the decision-making process. I think in the end, many of us regarded the structure, I certainly did, as perhaps a little too complicated, but that's for another day. What I want to say is that the leadership he provided to that forum was quite exemplary, and it actually provided the framework within which the economic management of Guyana was conducted for the next 2 decades. That is from the passage of the state planning legislation in 1977 until he demitted office in 1992. And the very structure continued well into the PPP times until such time as the changes took place towards the end of the millennium itself. The aspect of Desmond Hoyte that I want to draw to your attention besides that was perhaps some of the more important dimensions for his administration. I think he came to office by circumstances, forced circumstances, which, as you know, were extremely difficult. He just lost his family in circumstances that were quite appalling and symptomatic of the indiscipline that one finds in the streets of Guyana. They continue to today. Only over the weekend you would have seen road accidents continue to claim the lives of young and vibrant citizens of Guyana. But notwithstanding the fact that it is those circumstances, less than a year, which brought him to power, he took up the challenge in a manner that was extremely surprising when you consider all the circumstances, because he at no point exhibited, that is prior to his accession to office, at no point exhibited any particular interest in sitting in that seat of power. And LFS Burnham could rely on him to carry out functions assigned to him very, very assiduously. He was a very serious man. He could be extremely severe with those who failed to undertake tasks that were given to him. And in fact, I think most of the people that worked with him for the time when he was a minister, and certainly when he became vice president, were afraid of him. They were afraid in the sense of trying their best to ensure either that they never upset him or that they never failed to do that what they were supposed to do. So that was one dimension. The other dimension, we had come into a time, if you like, of some serious criminality. I mean, people talk about kick down the door bandits and the like. Some part of that was in place. The murder rates were doing some very funny things. And one of the things he committed himself to very, very early was to bring that crime wave, which of course compared to today pales into insignificance, but to bring that crime wave under control. And I think a lot of people make reference to the first couple of years, the issue of hanging and all of that. Even without that, I think he was recognized as having no patience or tolerance for the destruction of the Guyanese society that was characterized by the gun crimes and the indiscipline in various places. And so that was another dimension of his work. He committed himself to that. Even whilst he was in office, and I think those that would have had a chance to speak to him will recognize that he was a lawyer first and foremost, and he continued to be a lawyer to the end. He kept a close interest in things legal. He wanted to see the legal system work. And in fact, until Forbes Burnham's death, there were only two people that advised him on things legal, apart from Shahabuddin, who had responsibility for the entire framework of our constitution, criminal law, civil law structure. Whenever there was a specific issue or problem, whenever thought needed to be given to the framework, the ideology of the law, let me put it that way, Burnham would turn to Hugh Desmond Hoyte, who had developed as his junior in the law firm, to give consideration to the matter and to advise him. And that is something that interest he himself kept, even as he was president. You would see him scribbling and writing up papers, and as I think you know by now, the missing legislation not only originated with him, but the first draft of it was prepared by Hoyte himself, even as he was in office. So he kept that interest. It's something that, under his reading, I think kept him through the very difficult times of his personal tragedy, and it was always easy to engage him on these issues pertaining to the philosophy or the ideology of law. Finally, I want to say that notwithstanding one of his challenges and the burden of office, he was someone who never lost his sense of humor. The greatest raconteur I've come across is probably Hubert Jack, who would keep the cabinet and any group around him entertained for hours. The other one was, of course, Fred Wills, who Burnham dismissed as somebody who made up all the stories. Presumably, Jack's stories were all true. And Burnham would always accuse him of Wills of lying. But as regards Hugh Desmond Hoyte, I think Forbes was never quite sure as to the origin of half these stories that he would come up with. And people, after laughing, there would be a reflection, and Forbes would be saying, well, yeah, is that really true? Because I believe that I know A, B, C, D, and another story would start. But I'm saying that even as you carry these very, very heavy burdens, even as he carried these very heavy burdens, he was able to bring, sometimes self-deprecating stories to the table, and also to use that device as a means of bonding, bringing down the pressure and temperature when debates perhaps got too intense and threatened to get out of hand. And in a way, it points to, and what I'm trying to point to you is that here is a man who achieved a great deal in his life. In terms of Guyana's constitutional history, its political history, he of course, features and will continue to feature as a major icon, as the chairman has put it. But he was a man with many dimensions, many sides, and we, I think, tend to remember very often the latter part of his life, either in terms of overseeing the economic recovery, giving the space for the economic programs that had been crafted, or providing the confidence of leadership, a confidence that I think he inherited from working so closely with Forbes, who was himself a man of great confidence in Guyanese and in his own abilities, and in the virtues of the consulting and working with those around him. So we remember Hugh Desmond Hoyte as the person who was committed to a strong legal framework, who provided space for an economic recovery program, as I often say, the first government of this country that had the experience of, if you like, major economic problems which arose in his time, but the first one that could proudly say it had worked on those problems and delivered a country after having solved, by and large, the problems that had emerged during its era. No other could say that. The PPP government prior to Burnham could not say that, and even Forbes himself left us in the midst of a major downturn in economic activity. So we have a lot to be very proud of in looking at Hugh Desmond Hoyte. The party itself, initially, whilst he devoted more attention to the government than the party, he eventually turned to trying to, if you like, heal and reconfigure the party to take on the challenges that would face it in future, and try to leave a party and a government that would not be dysfunctional, because at times it could happen that, or it did happen, that some of the directions that we were exploring was simply very much exploratory and therefore involved unexplored territory. So these are the few thoughts, unstructured as they are, that I'd like to leave with you on this occasion in commemoration of the life and contribution of Hugh Desmond Hoyte to Guyana and to the Caribbean. We haven't touched on that side, but I hope the experience and the reflection on his life would provide us with inspiration to face the challenges which we undoubtedly face now and those others that we will face in the future, and to face them with the same sort of confidence and also with a sense of humor, which is one of the characteristics of Guyanese and Caribbean people in general that has helped us in the past to go through some of the terrible experiences that we've had, as well as to face life and, if you like, the prospect of a brighter life ahead of us. Thank you very much for being tolerant and enjoying the you.